Welcome to the Adobe Audition podcast project. This is part 3 of a series. And if you're following along with the handout, we're now at about number 13 in the handout. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a crazy effect here. The end of this clip says podcast party, Tanya's podcast party. So we want it to be kind of, I don't know, we want it to stop and slowly sort of fade out, I guess you might say. But kind of in a weird way. So what you're going to do is you're going to double click the very last clip. And I just did mine a minute ago while I was exporting a previous video. So that's why you see these warnings. Don't worry about that just yet. You're going to double click your last clip and it's going to bring you into the waveform editor. Now, here's the thing about the waveform editor. The waveform editor is the original file. So despite the fact that we have the podcast and we've got all that going on, that's not going on in here. This is actually the original file, the unedited file. It's the regular file. These changes that we make to this here are going to update to every piece of this in the previous clip. And if we make changes to something that like makes it shorter or longer, it's going to mess things up a little bit on the other line. So kind of the quick lesson here is if you know you're going to do this, this might be better to do at the very beginning before you start putting it all together, but you can certainly do it now. What we're going to do is we're going to make this ending part where it says podcast party. And you can choose whether you want to do it to the whole part, this podcast or podcast party, whatever. I'm going to go ahead and choose podcast party and kind of this whole section here. And then we're going to make a change. Now, the reason we have to do this in waveform editor is because the effect that we're going to do here is not one that we can do on the rack. It's actually under the effects menu, and there are certain effects in here that can only be done as what they call process effects. That means it has to be done right here, and then it processes it here, and then you can put it over on your other. So you can't just apply it in the rack. As a matter of fact, anything applied in the rack on here has to be actually, you have to push the word apply to be able to put it onto the clip before you can pull it into multi-track. So anyhow, what we're going to choose here is we're going to go to the effect and then time and pitch and then stretch and pitch. And what this is going to do is we're going to use this cool one in here called cutting power, which means it's sort of as it goes, it's going to sound like somebody's cutting the power to it. Now, you can just hit the space bar to preview this before you hit apply. So here I go. So it kind of like, party. I just went nuts. Okay, so I like that. I'm going to hit apply. And it's applying that in there. And so now if I listen to this from the beginning, it's going to be... Okay, so you can see it sounds like it's dying there towards the end. And that's what we're looking for. Now I'm going to save this. And when I do, and I save, and I return to the other one. So if I close this file... here, I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to switch back to multi-track. If I switch back to multi-track, what you're going to see are these warnings. And I'm just going to dismiss all the warnings for this file so they go away. As soon as we have to listen to it in here. Now, it cut off a little bit at the end, and that's because it kept the length that I already had here. But since I slowed it down, the length is actually now longer. Not a big deal. You have to point your mouse out here to the end, not like right about there. You have to get that icon and just pull out. And that's going to give me my original file so that I actually get the whole thing. There we go. And that takes it all the way out to the end. So once you've made changes, if you're slowing something down, it may, in the end, require you to lengthen the clip. Okay? All right. So we've got that one taken care of now. And I've returned to my multi-track, I've dismissed the warnings, and I fixed that time issue at the end. Next, we're going to pull in the record rewind sound effect on the sound effects track. So we're going to pull it into here. Now, as I said before, not all of these are at the right setting. So I'm going to scroll over so we can see. The sample rate for this one is 48,000, whereas the main whole thing is set to 44.1. So as I pull this in, it's going to give me, I guess, an error, for lack of a better word. If I pull this in here, it's going to say, hey, this does not match. Press OK to make a copy. And I'm going to do that. So now notice I've got the 44-100 one and the original. So now I'm going to be using this WAV file. So this is now it's a new file that's in my folder. If I come back into here in my TPOD folder, it comes in here and it like any files that it made, which this is one, is now in here in this conformed files. So don't get paranoid. Just don't delete those files when it creates files for you. All right. What we're going to do here is we're going to pull this down and we're going to put as much of this in this fade out area as we can earlier on. So let me scoot back. We can see what's going on here. All right. And it's not going to fit perfectly, obviously, because we have a whole lot of other stuff going on. But there's the fade out area where that was fading there. It's like, are you ready? And then we kind of want this thing to happen in here. So as I'm going to get rid of the beginning and end of this clip. So I'm just going to select both of these. And remember, it's Alt-T when you're in this view. So Alt-T to get rid of that. So it's mostly in the fade out. It's also very, very loud. And so we're going to pull the volume down. You can just tell by looking at it. It's really loud. Okay, so that's a little bit extreme. So we could like fade in and fade out or whatever. But we're going to just adjust the volume on this clip. So again, zoom up a little bit so I can see. We could pull this down using the volume line here, or we can come over here and we can adjust the volume. And I'm just gonna pull it down to like about -14. I mean, down quite a bit, 12, 13, 14, whatever. Let's see if that sounds a little more normalized to what else we've got going. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Now, of course, in your headphones, you can listen and try to decide whether you need to make that different or not. So that's kind of positioned in the fade out area and some of that dead space there. And that's good. All right. Now we're going to use the GSFX file. And so we're going to pull that one in towards the very end. So I'm going to get down here to the end of this a little bit. Oops, that's a little too far. Now we're like way at the end. All right, let's zoom back up here. All right, got that really zoomed out now, so let's do this. Okay, GSFX05, we'll pull it down here towards the end. And notice this has a whole lot of excess, like flat line. So be sure you've got your time selection tool and just select all this empty stuff and press delete on your keyboard to get rid of that. Let's see what this sounds like so you can just kind of see what's going on here. Okay, so that's what that little sound is. And then we're going to pull in the boom to the end of this clip. So I'm going to pull the boom in, and this is one that's going to have to make a copy. We're going to let that happen. And we're going to crossfade, so we're going to overlap these two. Overlap them quite a bit and see what we've got. Kind of explodes, an explosion sound, kind of hard to hear in here. All right, and then finally, we're going to add in the music. So we're going to come to the music line. Pull back over here in the music bed. This Looperman file is our music. We're going to pull it down to this line. And we're going to loop it so it plays over and over and over again. In order to loop, you have to right-click the clip and choose to loop. That by itself doesn't do anything. It gives you this little icon here, which means that if we make this clip longer, it will start to replay the clip over and over and over again. So that's what it does. So now we're going to go ahead and pull the edge of this out. All right. And then at the end here, we don't want this just to like stop. So I'm going to use that fade out again. So I'm going to pull in here, just fade the music out kind of as this stuff is all fading out. And I could pull it even farther. You just kind of have to play with it until you see what you like. So let's see what we've got going on. Again, I know it's really hard to hear on here. Wish I had some speakers, but here we go. All right, so there it goes. And again, if you felt like the music was too loud, you could pull the yellow line to pull the volume down on your music if you wished. You could also even fade your music in a little bit at the beginning of the clip so it doesn't come in straight away. All right. And then that would be where, like, you were doing a real podcast, you'd be like, hey guys, this is Tanya. Welcome to my podcast. Like, all that stuff would happen right after that little intro area. All right. So we've pretty much got it done. At this point, we are going to save it. And if it says it has to locate any files, always just say yes there. That just means that if it did have to make copies, it wants to make sure that it puts them in the right file folder. And then in order to use this, like online, or if we were going to pull it into Premiere, or use it somewhere else, we would export this out. So generally speaking, you export as a WAV or an MP3. They call that a mixdown. So you're going to go to File and Export, and then Multi-Track Mixdown, because we have multiple tracks. And then we would mix down the entire sequence. And then you would save it. So I'm going to call it TPOD Mixdown. That works for me. Into my TPOD folder. MP3 format is fine. Notice you have lots of other choices as well. Right now it says it's going to do it as 44-100 because that's what podcasts are set to in here. And then you would hit OK, and it's going to mix it down. Now, I've already done this once before, so it has one, but we're going to go ahead. Actually, I don't have this going to the right file folder, which is probably why it's saying that. So let me find my location here. This is my, I have a new TPOD folder, a TPOD2 folder. All right, there we go. All right, and so now I'm going to hit OK to save my mix down. And it takes a little bit of time, but not super long. And then I've got my mix down saved. So what you want to do is get out of the folder or out of Audition completely to make sure that your mix down recorded. So here it is. If I double click it, it'll open in. All right, there we go. So our beginning is about 10 to 12 seconds long. It works outside of here. And then the cool thing is if I really did want to record my podcast, like I was going to actually record a podcast now, I could create a new, like session, like so, example. And then I could actually pull in my podcast intro, this mix down, and that could be my intro. So I could make like a line in here. So on here, I could have an additional track. So I'll add a track, and I could call this track my intro or intro outro if I also had an outro. And then I could pull my TPOD mix down up in here and then drag it in and use it in here. And then I don't have to deal with like all of its pieces everywhere. And if my intro was too loud, whatever, I'd be able to adjust it in here. And that way I wouldn't have to open up the original intro and have all of those lines in here in addition to my actual podcast. So anyway, that is the getting started with Adobe Audition. So hopefully you learned a lot through that. Just some things to mention. Just pay close attention to your volume. These levels down here will help you to keep track of that. And then make sure that if you are dealing with files, that you understand that once it puts a copy in there or once you've added a file, you need to leave it there. If you move it around, Audition can't find it and the file will go offline. That's what they call that. And that can create all kinds of problems for you. All right, so good luck and have fun in Audition recording.